John Tyner, President of Washington County Public Affairs Forum. Never been convicted that I know of, so that's my primary qualification. The Washington County Public Affairs Forum is a public service organization dedicated to getting issues out in front of the Washington County citizenry as a whole, and basically to communicate both ways, because we have a questioning session that follows this. It's open to members of the forum, and the microphone's right there. We queue up. We have two programs today. The first is with the treasurer and with his initiative, and Treasurer Wheeler is here. He'll be opposed by Steve Buckstein of the Cascade Policy Institute. Steve's been here before, as has the treasurer, so they pretty much know the rules. We're gonna have, they get 10 minutes each way. Pro probably goes first, and then 2 rebuttal, and then it's open for questions. We're going to truncate a little bit the second of the two, the driver's license issue, which is a measure 88, because CASA indicated they would have a representative here, but CASA actually has apparently the big publicity thing with the governor, and so they actually couldn't free up anybody. We tried over a period of several weeks to get someone there from there or another speaker, but we were unable to do so. So Mr. Ludwig will give a presentation towards the end. We'll allocate 15-20 minutes for him at the end. So the first 45 minutes are Mr. Buckstein and Treasurer Wheeler. Again, I guess I should inquire formally, is anybody from CASA here? Okay, so we're going to do that measure 86 first and 88. 86 gets the first 45 minutes, and as soon as the treasurer is finished with his coffee, I'll invite him up here. He's been here before, and I usually don't do long intros because I've done some of those in the past, and I end up talking about Eagle Scout awards and things I can't verify. So within the 10 minutes, the people can provide their own bio, and I thank you for being here, Mr. Treasurer. You're on. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you again for having me here. I always appreciate it. This is a great forum. You are folks who take the policy issues of the day very seriously, and we always have a robust discussion and a robust debate. And so I'm more than thrilled to be part of this today. I'm here to talk about a specific ballot measure that's on your November ballot. It's ballot measure 86. I want to start by reading to you what the Eugene Register Guard said in endorsing ballot measure 86. They said, if we vote for measure 86, it will signal lawmakers that Oregonians support higher education, value long-term thinking, and would rather invest than spend. Ballot measure 86 is a simple and responsible plan to make it easier for Oregonians to be able to afford universities and community colleges. It reduces student debt, and it increases funding for vocational and technical training programs at community colleges. Now, what's the best case for ballot measure 86? Ballot measure 86 does what national studies has confirmed and what Oregon employers have told us for a long time, that in a skills-based, globally competitive economy, advanced education and job training is more important than ever. So with that bit of knowledge firmly established, one has to ask the question, why then is the state of Oregon moving in exactly the wrong direction? When it comes to the cost of educating a student in Oregon at the higher education level, the cost has actually remained relatively stable over the last 30 years, adjusted for inflation. But the price that students and their families pay to attend universities and community colleges has gone up precipitously. It's gone up 50% over a recent 8-year period. Now, how can that be, that the cost of educating remains stable, but the price students and their families pay increases? The answer is very clear. The state legislature has systematically defunded higher education over the last 25 years. And as they have reduced taxpayer support for higher education, there's been a cost shift right onto the backs of students and their families, thus the increasing prices paid by students and their families. Well, you might say, an economist would say, well, that's what student aid is for, is to help middle income and lower income students to be able to afford that advanced education and training that employers say everybody needs. Well, the fact is we're not only a high-price state when it comes to higher education, we are a low student aid state. Our student aid program is 1/3 the national average, and it's 1/7 the top state in the country, which happens to be South Carolina. Student aid is so hard to come by in Oregon that for every 5 students who apply based on need and qualify for student aid, only 1 gets anything. I have a question for you. What happens to the other 4? Well, we know the answer. The other 4 either take on a lot of debt, they and their families, or worse yet, they decide not to seek that advanced education and job training. The situation, unfortunately, is even worse when it comes to vocational and technical training. Not everybody wants or needs to go to a university, but everybody needs access to job skills in a skills-based economy. But when it comes to vocational and technical training, this state made a very penny-wise and pound-foolish decision a number of years ago to effectively gut vocational and technical training in our high schools. Ballot Measure 86 reverses these trends. Not in the immediate term. This is a long-term strategy, a long-term commitment to higher education, to student financial aid, and to vocational and technical training. But with time, it reverses the tide and gets us off the bottom of all of these lists that we don't want to be on the bottom of when it comes to the cost that students pay for education and access to vocational and technical training. So how does it work? Well, Ballot Measure 86 gives the legislature a set of tools that they don't currently have access to. The only tool they have access to when it comes to funding student aid or vocational and technical training is tax dollars. They can raise taxes. That's all that's currently available to them. Ballot Measure 86 gives them a series of responsible, proven tools that have been used for decades by other institutions. Most notably, it allows the legislature to create a permanent, growing endowment dedicated to student financial aid and vocational and technical training. It's the same kind of endowment that's used by Harvard, by Stanford, by MIT, by other institutions. Why do they do that? They do it because they want to take advantage of compound earnings over the long run. Ballot Measure 86 does that. In a resource-constrained state, everything shouldn't be about taxes. We should also take advantage of compound earnings when we have the ability to do that over the long run. Secondarily, Ballot Measure 86 also allows community foundations and philanthropic and community-minded organizations and individuals to make contributions to that endowment. In other words, for people who support higher education and want to connect middle-class and lower-income students with those job skills, Ballot Measure 86 allows them to make direct contributions into that fund. It also opens the door to the question, well, how do you seed it? There's a couple of ways you could seed the fund. You could just directly appropriate tax dollars into the fund the way we do today. The legislature would have to prioritize it and say, student financial aid is important to us, and we're going to prioritize it, work it into the budget, and put it into the endowment. That's one strategy. We also opened the door to using a limited, prudent amount of general obligation bonding capacity as one potential source in the mix to help seed the endowment. Now, I want to be clear on this question of bonding. When I first proposed this 3 years ago, interest rates were effectively 0. It would have been a good move 3 years ago. Interest rates now are about 3.5% for the kind of bonds that we're talking about, the 30-year bonds. I've been very clear that if interest rates get above about 4.5%, 5%, it no longer makes sense to use any bonding capacity for this purpose. The goal here is if the voters pass it now, we're going to push for some usage of bonding capacity in the next legislative session while interest rates are still low. But beyond that, it goes back probably strictly to direct appropriations to acknowledge the reality that as interest rates go up, bonding no longer makes sense. I hope you will join the large number of institutions across this state that have endorsed ballot measure 86, employer organizations like the Oregon Business Association, the Portland Business Alliance, and others, labor organizations like SEIU and the American Federation of Teachers of Oregon, community colleges like Portland Community College, universities like the University of Oregon and Oregon State, and a whole host of community-minded organizations like the Oregon League of Women Voters and the Oregon PTA and others. And of course, we've gotten good traction with a number of newspaper organizations. The Eugene Register-Guard, the Mail Medford Tribune, the Portland Tribune, the East Oregonian, the Daily Historian, and others have all endorsed ballot measure 86, and I encourage you to give it due consideration. Again, this is about sending a signal to the legislature that we value higher education, that we value long-term thinking, and that we would rather invest than spend. This is an opportunity for the state of Oregon to create a permanent growing endowment dedicated to workforce development that would be a future competitive advantage for the state of Oregon and its future residents. I hope you'll join me in supporting ballot measure 86. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
I'll get those. I can move this thing away. We have a little thing we're going to do here. I see that the thing he's standing on is actually might be a tripping hazard. So, in the interest of safety, we don't want anything happening to Mr. Buckstein. I guess the treasurer's okay. No, we fixed it. We fixed it. Thank you. Come on. I survived. Very good. You're more agile than some of us, I think. Well, thank you for inviting me today. I am a member of the forum, and what some of you may not know too much about me, Steve Buckstein with Cascade Policy Institute. I attended public schools in Oregon, grade school, high school, college, got an MBA at Oregon State, and prior to that a bachelor's in physics. So I have a keen interest in public policies that enhance Oregonians' ability to get the education, the higher education that they want and need. I helped found Cascade Policy Institute in 1991 to enhance, promote such goals. Our mission is to enhance individual liberty, personal responsibility, and economic opportunity in Oregon. And I think education is one of the strongest ways we can do all of those things. You can see most of our work at cascadepolicy.org. And because I'll probably forget at the end, I brought two commentaries that are at the back there if you'd like to take them when you leave, that directly address what we're talking about today, Measure 86. As an opponent of Measure 86, I was asked by Secretary of State Kate Brown to be on what's called the Explanatory Committee for the measure. This is a group that creates the objective statement that you'll see in your voter's pamphlet, which you should get any day now, about what Measure 86 actually does. I think Ted and I agree that we agree that what the language of Measure 86 says, but we don't agree on whether it's necessarily good public policy. We both agree that education is important, but I have a little different take on how to improve education in Oregon, and it doesn't include Measure 86. First, Measure 86 is silent about which students, if any, might benefit. It doesn't say whether any support that will be given to students will take the form of grants or subsidies or scholarships or a pay-it-forward program, which has been talked about quite a lot in Oregon. All these decisions, if voters pass Measure 86, all these decisions will be made by an unnamed, as yet unnamed public body, maybe the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, but the measure is silent about who exactly will make those decisions. And whatever body it is that will make those decisions, it will be subject to the same lobbying efforts that the legislature is subject to now. As Ted pointed out, the legislature has systematically reduced the funding for higher education over a number of years. Part of that, I think, in the real world is due to the fact that lobbyists for other things have made their case more strongly that the money should go to their projects, whatever they are, other than higher education. And second, even if Measure 86 does help some students in the short run, I believe it'll make the whole higher education system more costly in the long run. Specific students will benefit if there are scholarships or whatever form of aid there is,
for Measure 86, those students will benefit. But anytime that you have more money from third-party payers, is the economics term, in this case the federal government or the state government, anytime more money like that is flowing into an institution, it makes the organizations in that institution somewhat less concerned about holding their costs down, in this case, colleges and universities. But, and I think we all agree that we would like to find ways to hold the cost down of higher education. Even if it's been flat over the last several decades, and I think it's actually gone up about 12% in real terms adjusted for inflation, but that's a lot less than some other things have gone up in our society. I think there are ways to reduce the cost of higher education, but Measure 86 is silent about the cost. It just assumes whatever the cost is the cost, and it's going to try and subsidize some students to help them afford that cost. One way to address the cost of higher education in Oregon, Ted actually made the case himself, and I was quite impressed with his argument. Almost a year ago in October, before this forum, he pointed out that, and this is a quote, that he was asked, will the money in Measure 86 be spent appropriately? And his quote was that the higher education system, the university system, is very slow to adapt the opportunities around technology. Then he said there's a lot of institutional inertia in the university system, just as there is in Salem, and all of these new technologies have opened up new windows to learning that don't require a student to even be in the same state. And then he pulled out, I assume it was an iPhone, I have an Android, but same concept. He pulled out his iPhone and said, I have on my phone a program called iTunes University, where I can listen to lectures from some of the best academics in the world, and it doesn't cost me a cent. And he went on to say that this is going to be can be a game changer in terms of higher education. And I agree with him. And he ended up by saying it doesn't cost a cent, it can be a game changer, and quote, it undercuts the entire economic model of the university system as it currently exists today. Again, I agree. We're just at the beginning of this change, I think, in how we learn. There are all kind of problems, all kind of concerns. There was a op-ed in the Oregonian from a PSU professor over the weekend saying that that online education doesn't deliver what you think it does. The same argument could be made when we started to have cars replacing horses. There were all kind of problems. When we had airplanes revolutionizing long-range travel. All kind of problems when you start something new, but it's coming, and I think we need to embrace it. So if technology will put downward pressure on the cost of higher education, one of my concerns about Measure 86 is why saddle Oregon taxpayers with perhaps $100 million or more in bond debt or any money that the legislature allocates. If it's bonding, it'll probably be for 30 years. Even if it's a low interest rate, it'll be for 30 years to subsidize the cost of education that right now is high cost. By the end of that 30 years, it may very well be a lot lower. And if you didn't realize that taxpayers will be paying back the bonds, you're not alone. When Ted started talking about this in the legislature, even I was confused, and I think some legislators were. We were assuming that you borrow money at low interest rates and you earn high interest rates, and the difference goes to subsidies. But that's not how Measure 86 operates. The state would, if the state's going to borrow money, it will borrow the money at whatever the interest rate is, 3.5%, let's say, and it will be paid back through the general fund, which is primarily funded by all of us, individual and business income taxpayers in the state. So it almost doesn't matter. Obviously, it may not be prudent to borrow at high interest rates, as Ted said, but whatever the interest rate is, it's us, the taxpayers, that will pay those bonds back, not the fund. The fund will get the money, and hopefully the Treasurer's Office will invest it at good rates, and there will be money for subsidies, and it will help some students. But it's not the kind of situation that I think a lot of people thought that it was. The bond payments, if there are bond payments or if the legislature allocates money to the fund, if Measure 86 passes, that's money, that's not additional money, as Ted pointed out. It's not a new tax on us. But if any money is spent to be put into this permanent fund, whether it's bonding or whether it's direct allocations from the legislature, that's money that the legislature then doesn't have to fund other priorities, whether it's K through 12 education, whether it's social services, healthcare, whatever it is, including money that it might now be allocating or might have thought to allocate to the higher education system directly. It's all out of the same pot. Finally, I have a concern. We're talking about we want our children, our students to be college ready. We want them to be job ready, career ready, so that they can prosper in our society. But based on recent SAT scores, which just came out I think last week, only 46% of Oregon's high school graduates are deemed college ready. A couple weeks earlier, we found out that only 30% of those taking the ACT college entrance exams are considered college ready in all 4 tested subjects, which are English, reading, math, and science. Only 30% of Oregon's high school graduates are deemed college ready for in those subjects. And a report that was released at the end of September by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce found that Oregon is one of the very worst states when it comes to preparing students for college and the workforce. We earned a D in academic achievement in that report, and we earned an F in post-secondary workforce readiness. This is before they get to college or before they get into the workforce. This is basically kids graduating from high school in Oregon. So my point is, before we encourage more spending on higher education, which is what Measure 86 would encourage, shouldn't we find ways for our public school system to prepare most college-bound students to actually succeed there, because they're not ready to succeed there today? Otherwise, we're just paying twice for remedial courses to teach college students what they should have learned in high school. I think removing the need for costly and time-consuming remedial courses, and I believe a majority of community college students in Oregon, you graduate from high school, you go into community college, a majority of them need some remedial courses, and a smaller percentage need remedial courses in 4-year schools. That's costly. If it's a public institution, taxpayers are paying some of that cost, and it's time-consuming. It means that it may take longer for the student to graduate, and it may increase the chances that the student never graduates. We already have a problem with that. So I think in conclusion, Measure 86 is the wrong way to address the issue of college affordability. We should be trying to find ways to make college cheaper, not spending more taxpayer money to pay for it. So I urge you to vote no on Measure 86. Thank you.
I feel like the gunfighter left his guns in the bar. You're over there. Everyone so far has in the process has stayed within their time limitations, which is very respectful to other folks. 2 minutes of each for rebuttal, and then we'll open for questions to members of the forum.
Thank you. I'll just quickly go through them. First of all, Steve is correct that ballot measure 86 does not address the cost of the higher education system. This isn't about that. This is about student financial aid and vocational and technical training. This is not an excuse for universities or community colleges to walk away from being effective managers of the resources they have. There is still oversight, there are still demands, and Steve and I happen to agree on the profound impact of technology in the years ahead. That said, I'm not willing to bank an entire generation's ability to be competitive in the workforce in the coming years against what might happen in the future with new technologies. Second of all, Steve had suggested that more student aid will lead to higher costs. That's called the Bennett hypothesis. It was proposed by William Bennett when he was the Secretary of Education. It's been thoroughly debunked. I'll give you proof right here in the state of Oregon. I could use national studies, but I won't. Student financial aid used to be a lot higher in the state of Oregon than it is today. The cost of educating a student 40 years ago was less. So as student financial aid decreased, the cost has actually gone up. So that's in direct contrary data to the Bennett hypothesis. It is true that there is no such solution to what I'm proposing that is without risk and without cost. I want to be very clear, though, when we're talking about the bonding portion of this. In any given budget cycle, the legislature is expected to stay within its existing bonding capacity. Ballot Measure 86 does that. It has never been proposed that Ballot Measure 86 or any debt issued in accordance with 86 go beyond the legislature's own very conservative estimates of its current bonding capacity. Steve is right that there are other withering priorities for the state of Oregon. This is only one. It's an important fundamental one to our economic competitiveness, but I agree with Steve that there are other pressing priorities. I would add to the list the abysmal non-completion rate in our public high schools statewide. But that doesn't mean we should take our foot off the gas pedal on 86 while we go fix other things in sequence. We need to address all of these issues. That's what leadership is about. And for about 30 years, we've ignored this very important workforce development component of Oregon's economy. So we should do this, and we should do the other things just as Steve proposes. And then finally, I'll just say, had we done this 30 years ago, using actual returns that we've received in our largest endowment fund, assuming 4% interest rates, which is much higher than the rates at which we'd issue, if we'd issued $100 million of bonds, the most expensive way we could possibly do this, instead of using appropriations at all or a mix, just use bonds. If we'd done it 30 years ago, that $100 million would be with $474 million today. That's what the endowment would be worth. And it would have also kicked out an additional $351 million in additional student financial aid. Why? That's just the difference between compound earnings, investing, as opposed to making direct appropriations, spending money on a biennium to biennium basis. But as Steve rightly points out, with all the other competing priorities in our state, student financial aid and vocational and technical training not only are never prioritized in any given budget cycle, they're actually reduced. Ballot Measure 86 takes us outside the box and thinks of a different way to raise funds for these things that ultimately could take it out of the competition against K through 12 education and other pressing priorities. So again, I hope you'll join our broad coalition in supporting Ballot Measure 86. Thank you.
Let me just make one response. There's a number here that I could give, but I think the idea that, if Measure 86 passes and if money goes to students, through the subsidies, that will be added on to what's already being given from the legislature, but there's no assurance of that. As Ted knows, and as any of you that are in the financial world know, money is fungible. If Measure 86 passes and the legislature takes this as a mandate from the people to prioritize higher education, which they haven't done for decades, if they change their priority and say, okay, we're going to put general fund money or bond money into this fund and help students, there's nothing in Measure, they can do that publicly and they can all get hurrahs and pats on the back. I funded higher education. And then on the other side, they can turn around when the appropriations come in from the higher education, Oregon State, University of Oregon, et cetera, and reduce what they would have given them anyway. And there won't be any headlines about that because there's no definite assurance of what they will fund the higher education system. So if they borrow $100 million, to keep it simple, and the fund earns 5% and the first year, let's say, and provides $5 million of subsidies for students, there's nothing in Measure 86 that says the legislature can't take credit for that and then quietly say, well, instead of giving you X in the next biennium, we're going to give you $5 or $10 million less than X directly to the universities. And again, people don't make the connection. The students have some more money, which is great, but the system, it's taken away on the other side, so it really doesn't necessarily do anything. It would be great if we could deal with all these priorities at the same time. The case I'm making is that since the results of our K through 12 system are so, I would use the word abysmal, and it doesn't take more money. We can go into that in another meeting, but I think there's plenty of money in the K through 12 system. I think it's not being used properly. I think there are ways to change that. But again, when you look at the SAT scores, the ACT scores, and the U.S. Chamber report, we're not preparing kids to go to college. So even if they get a subsidy, a lot of them we're not doing them much of a service having them go to college or even technical training if they haven't gotten what they needed in high school. So again, I would say, encourage you to vote no on Measure 86 and let's prioritize getting them college and work ready by the time they graduate from high school. Thank you.
Thank you. The forum is a nonpartisan body, and we extended the comments out. We have 15 minutes of questions, and for members of the forum only. I would just take a privilege, I haven't opined at all, but 30 years ago when I was actually 30 years old, I ran for the state legislature, and the chancellor of the higher education came down and was talking about the fact that a brick had recently fallen on a University of Oregon student, and the University of Oregon had moved from one of the top public universities in the country to a secondary one. Here we are 30 years later, and I understand the support is 9% from the legislature. It's even reduced from that, so I'm glad we're talking about education, whichever position we may be on. Yes, sir.
Harry Bodine, forum member. My wife occasionally trusts me with a checkbook. I have a couple of questions, sort of nitpick questions maybe, on pages 46 and 47 of the voter's pamphlet. One is the estimate of financial impact. There is no financial impact to either state or local government expenditures or revenues. I'm curious about that. Also, I notice this is Article 11R. R is the 18th letter in the alphabet, so we've been issuing bonds for 17 other programs. And finally, in the explanatory statement, it says here that that bonds will be backed by the full faith and credit of the state of Oregon, with the exception of the ad valorem property tax. I thought the rule was in Oregon that if all else fails, you levy a property tax to pay off your bond debt. And I'd like a response on that if I could. And thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the question, and you're doing much better. I don't even know where my family's checkbook is at this point, so you're way ahead of me. First of all, with regard to there being no financial impact, that is factually true. There's a committee created, I sit on it as one member, looks at the ins and outs of each of the ballot measures and then assigns a financial impact. Ballot measure 86 incurs no costs, it issues no bonds, it is non-directive to the legislature. It gives the legislature tools that then they can use in their legislative session, and they have a debate and a deliberation about whether or not they want to prioritize this. That holds true both for the creation of the endowment and whether or not they want to issue bonds to help support the endowment. Even if they want to use direct appropriations, the legislature still has to publicly weigh competing options, competing priorities, and determine whether or not this is a high enough priority for them to actually fund it. So any cost incurred, any bonds issued in accordance with ballot measure 86 would happen in the context of a regular legislative session in the full light of day with a full debate. My belief and my assumption, and the assumption of everybody in our coalition, is that when ballot measure 86 passes, that gives the legislature a mandate to act, as opposed to doing what they've done for 25 years, which is a whole lot of nothing when it comes to funding these things. With regard to the amendments you referred to, the Oregon Constitution was drafted such that no bonds could be issued. I believe it's in excess of $50,000 without a specific vote of support from the people. So every time we use general obligation bonds, those that are backed by the full faith and credit of the state of Oregon, for a new purpose, it has to go out to the voters. That's why this is on the ballot as a constitutional amendment. It would be the 18th time that we've added a new use for our general obligation bonding capacity. I think the last time we did it was 2 legislative sessions ago, so it's not unusual, but when people see constitutional amendment on their ballot, it certainly raises the stakes for a lot of people. And then last but not least, there are a number of things written into the bonding measure that are fairly detailed and specific, and I appreciate your having taken the time to actually go through that. This is a locked endowment with what I will call an asterisk. Locked meaning the legislature cannot rate it when it gets large enough for other purposes, and that came through our experience with the Oregon Cultural Trust, which was rated by the legislature. It takes a very high threshold for the legislature to use the funds in this endowment. It would require an 80% vote of both houses plus the agreement of the governor. The reason we wrote that in, and it's the highest threshold, by the way, of any of the different trust funds we have, the reason we wrote that in was for 2 possibilities. The first was a Cascadia level earthquake that requires the state of Oregon to find sources to help us rebuild our state quickly. The second was in the event of a terrorist attack. So we left that very small sliver of possibility with a high threshold for the legislature to act if necessary. I thank you for your question, sir.
Just real quick, it is correct that there is no overall financial impact of Measure 86. That's why the committee found that. But there will be a financial impact, again, if the legislature allocates money from the general fund to this permanent fund for higher ed or borrows money, because that will have a fiscal impact on what they would have spent the money on, as I mentioned. If they put money into this fund for higher education, they don't have that money that they might have spent on K through 12 or on social services. So the way the law is worded, there's no financial impact, but if you put a higher priority on some other program in Oregon, there could be a financial impact on your program because of Measure 86. The second thing is one other point that's in the measure, and I don't think either Ted or I understand why it's in there, but it is in the explanatory statement. I made sure that Oregonians realize this. The measure is written so that the limit, even though prudently they can't borrow anywhere near this, the limit on Measure 86 is that they can borrow up to 1% of the real market value of all property in the state of Oregon. Does anybody know, other than Ted, how much that is? About $430 billion. So 1% of that means they could borrow $4.3 billion. They're not going to. I mean, we probably couldn't float that many bonds or anywhere near it. But for some reason, somebody thought that it would be a nice idea to allow almost all our bonding capacity for years in the future to go to this, and I don't think that's a good approach. Thank you.
Lois O'Brien. In years past, long ago and recent past, but mostly longer ago, people who wanted to go to college, they worked hard. They got jobs through their earlier days in school, so they'd be ready for college. Their parents might have been able to put away a few pennies or something. And the people that went to college had a burning desire for it. Now the opinion is that everybody should go to college. And when it's paid for, they don't necessarily have that heartfelt desire for college. And I have a hard time with the public having to pay for someone's college so readily and easily. I say this is not a necessary thing to have happen, and I'd like to get a better understanding why the government needs to do this. There are no jobs for all these kids that graduate. There are no jobs available. So there's so many other reasons, like getting the economy in such a situation where it's easy for businesses to succeed and more jobs, more taxes to the state. So I'd like to know why this is necessary, it is a big expenditure, no matter when you say it's not, but it is. This is a big chunk of money out of our things. And I don't see why it's government's business to get this involved in everybody's college education.
Thank you, Lois. And that was a well-stated question, and I appreciate it. And you're not alone. I get that question quite a lot. And what I have to remind people is that the public support for higher education has actually gone down precipitously over the years. At the time I was in college, one could take on student financial aid and work a summer job, a single summer job, and be able to pay off all of their student debt. So what's new for this latest generation is the amount of student debt they're taking on. And here in the state of Oregon, that's directly related to the government's declining participation in student financial aid. As I say, we're one of the few states at the bottom of the list where we already sort of do what you're proposing. We don't do much of anything. And the net result is young people still want access to education and job training because they know it's required in a skills-based economy. And so they're willing to take on staggering amounts of student debt in order to get that education. Now, in terms of your comment that not everybody needs or wants to go to a university or even a community college, I agree with you wholeheartedly. In fact, part of what this ballot measure tries to do is increase funding for partnerships between community colleges, high schools, and private sector employers who actually want to participate and help build partnerships. And if I could take 45 seconds, I'd like to just briefly describe one of those partnerships. Lynn Benton Community College is in Albany, and it's right across from Lebanon, across I-5 from Lebanon. Lebanon used to be a mill town. I happen to know that because my dad used to run the mill back in the day. When the mill disappeared, a lot of those young people lost their opportunity to go right from high school into high-paying manufacturing jobs in the mill. But interestingly, they're not going over to Lynn Benton Community College in big numbers either. So the question is, why not? Well, they did some work, the university and some of the college career counselors and administrators and teachers and parents and students over at the high school, and they found out there just isn't a culture of participation in college. Those kids would mostly be the first in their families to go to college. So they're sort of in your frame of mind. They don't need to go to college, but they do need access to skills. So what they created, the high school, the community college, and some private sector employers, was the state's first advanced transportation training facility that teaches young people to work in diesel technology, which is really important for manufacturing and important for agriculture. The kids, when they come over, they're actually getting college credit, but that's sort of beside the point. The important thing is they're getting skills that employers in this state want today, like Toyota. Toyota being one of the employers that's helped paying for the partnership. So we're not just leveraging compound earnings in the endowment and leveraging philanthropic contributions. This is an example of how we can leverage partnerships with the private sector to actually help support technical job training for students in Oregon. The taxpayers have nothing to do with it. It's about a partnership that's of benefit to the private sector, connecting young people with skills that the private sector deems are necessary. One other thing they're doing at that center, they're learning how to do diagnostics for alternative energy cars, something which Toyota, located up here on Hayden Island, is obviously very interested in. These are very high-paid, good jobs for young people who do not want necessarily or need to go to a university or a community college, but they've chosen to seek technical training, and we've leveraged that private sector relationship so that the taxpayers aren't footing the whole bill. I think it's this is an example of a modern, relevant tool that makes government work in a new age, where things are frankly different for this generation and future generations. And I hope people think about ballot measure 86 in that capacity. The way we do things hasn't worked. So we need to start asking ourselves, what are the new tools that make government work in our world economy as it is today? Thanks, Lois, for the question. I appreciate it.
Just real quick, I was glad to hear, I've heard the story before about Lynn Benton Community College and Lebanon High School and private sector employers, and as Ted pointed out, it didn't take any additional tax dollars. I think those are the kind of partnerships that we can foster without Measure 86. So we don't need more government, we don't need more tax dollars, we need more creative thinking between the public and private sector how to get kids the skills and education they need, and I think we can do that using the Lebanon situation as maybe the first successful model. Thank you.
Chris, can you make your question real concise? Because we've got about 2 minutes left before we start the other ballot measure.
Chris Leslie, Forum member. Gentlemen, where does it say in the Constitution that we have to educate our public?
So this may just be, Chris, thank you for the question. This may be a philosophical difference, and I'll cop to that. People can want the same thing for our society and for our communities. I assume you're all members of this forum because you love this state and you want to see right by it. And we can have honest disagreements of opinion about what the right strategy is. Steve and I consider ourselves friends. We have an honest disagreement on this particular issue, but that doesn't mean we don't agree on a whole host of other important issues to this state. I'll tell you where I come from. I believe that education is a public good. What do I mean by that? I mean that even if I don't get an education, but you do, it benefits me and it benefits my community. I would rather live in an economically prosperous state than one that has an economy closer to Appalachia. And when I look at the state of our economy and I see that we're struggling with regard to wage and income growth, when we have high rates of hunger, homelessness, and poverty, when we have failed to connect young people, particularly in rural Oregon, in the natural resources economy, to opportunities that could help them support themselves and their families in this economy, my belief is educating our population is good for all of us because it helps people to become economically self-sufficient, it strengthens our families and our communities, and ultimately it's good for our state to have an economically competitive state. And nobody disputes that having an educated and well-trained workforce is fundamental to that kind of long-term economic competitiveness. But thank you for your question, sir. I appreciate it.
You asked where in the Constitution does it say the state of Oregon should fund higher education. As far as I know, it doesn't. It does say that the legislature should provide a system of common schools, which was the parlance 100 years ago for basically our K through 12 system. It doesn't even say the legislature should fund government schools. And this gets into the philosophical issue that Lois was talking about. I agree with Ted that education is important, but again, there are limited resources. We all have limited resources. We all have to make choices. I would rather see Oregon get K through 12 right before we put more money into a system to encourage students to go where, as Lois said, maybe they shouldn't. We have a new goal in Oregon, 40-40-20. We want 40% of our adults to have a 4-year degree or higher, 40% community college, 20% not just have a high school degree, but be college and career ready is the way the goal is stated. And from all those reports I told you about in the last few weeks, we're nowhere near that. Let's concentrate on that. Vote no on Measure 86, and let's get education right at something that I think is more important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buckstein. Treasurer Wheeler. If you have to go someplace, this is probably time to run if you've got to get someplace quickly. At this point in time, the very controversial measure is on the ballot, and we can't get anyone to appear on the other side. But and we've tried a little bit. When we followed up, we thought a confirmation from one group, and they weren't here. So if we screwed up, I apologize to CASA. But at this point in time, on ballot measure 88, Jim Ludwig is here. He's a chief petitioner, and he's prepared to discuss this. In fairness, he said he might discuss something for the other side too. I always hesitate to let my opponent take that opportunity with my case, but I'm sure it's controversial. And basically, you can go for 5-8 minutes if you want to. The television show takes an hour, so you can have questions after the TV thing turns off too, but you've got 5 to 8 minutes and we'll take questions. Thank you, Mr. Ludwig.
Thank you, John, for inviting me, and I hope you do have some questions. I'm disappointed that CASA is not here. Kind of a surprise to me that they wouldn't show, but I'm here in opposition to Measure 88. On your tables, there's a picture of the prototype of the proposed driver card that's supposed to be not used for identification, that's supposed to be significantly different than your driver's license. What I'd encourage you to do is take a look at it and then pull out your wallet and look at your driver's license. The fact of the matter is, if ballot measure 88 passes, the first day it passes will be used for an ID, it'll be used to board planes, and everything you use your driver's license for. On May the 1st of last year, on the steps of the state capitol, with great fanfare and acclaim, Governor Kitzhofer signed into law Senate Bill 833. At least he thought he signed it into law, because as soon as the ink was dry on his signature, we started the referendum process. Now, nobody gave us a chance. I mean, the odds of doing a referendum are huge. You only have 90 days after the end of the session to collect 58,142 signatures. If there was a tote board in the rotunda part of the Capitol building, we would have went off at 1,000 to 1 underdogs, kind of like me racing California Chrome in a 100-yard dash. We surprised everybody. We collected 77,000 signatures. We turned in 71 after we subtracted out the duplicates and unregistered voters. The reason we qualified is we had a 93.5% verification rate. According to people who work in the elections office, that is likely the all-time record. And the record for referendums is over 110 years, the all-time record for verification. We more than doubled the online signature record. The statistic that meant the most to me, however, was this. We collected signatures from 134 communities in Oregon. I've lived most of my life in the state. I thought I knew every nook and cranny. I discovered there's places in Oregon I didn't know existed. If there ever was truly a citizen's referendum, it's this. And a referendum, of course, as you're aware, is where you bring up a law you don't like and you want it voted down. Well, this issue is far bigger than driver's license. It touches on our sovereignty as a nation and the rule of law. Every country in the world has a sovereign right to pick and choose who comes into their country. Under Measure 88, the Mexican Consular Office would usurp that sovereignty because they could issue the Mexican matricular cards, which would be shown as a valid form of ID to get a driver's license and allow illegal aliens to stay in the state. The rule of law is the cornerstone of our judicial system. The notion that no man is above the law. There's a great quote by President John Adams. He said, quote, "We are a nation of laws and not of men." Well, compare that to Governor Kitzhofer. On May the 1st, 2012, once again on the steps of the state capitol, he said, and I'm going to paraphrase him, but he said something like, illegal aliens need to come out of the shadows. They need to be able to drive back and forth to their jobs. In essence, the governor was saying they need to be able to drive back and forth to jobs they can't legally have, hired by companies that can't legally hire them, and using Social Security numbers stolen from American citizens. That's the antithesis of the rule of law. Well, how do we get to this place in time? It's necessary to go back to September 11th, 2001. When Muhammad Atta came here, he came here on a 6-month visa. One of the first things he did was go to Florida and get a 6-year driver's license. He used that driver's license to open bank accounts, take flying lessons, and board a plane on 9/11. The 19 Islamic terrorists had 26 different state driver's licenses on them. And it's one of the reasons why the 9/11 Commission recommended that all states end the practice of giving driver cards to people who couldn't prove they're legally here. Now, most states followed suit. Unfortunately, Oregon was somewhat of an outlier. It wasn't until late 2007 we started to make the proper change. Governor Ted Kulongowski, during that year, happened to attend a mock terrorist attack conducted by the Department of Homeland Security in Portland. Well, following the event, he met with those officials who told him that Oregon's driver license that then had become the gold standard for potential terrorists, illegal aliens, and the Mexican drug cartel. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. One, geographical. We're halfway between Canada and Mexico, and I-5 goes up the center of Oregon. It's the main distribution route for the Mexican drug cartel. Oregon now ranks 4th in the nation in per capita illicit drug use. And quite frankly, the most important document a drug dealer can possess is a valid state driver's license or card. Because if they're pulled over by a state trooper and they can show that card, the trooper might not have probable cause to search their vehicle. The other reason why Oregon was such, the driver's card was so sought out by the drug cartels and illegal aliens and potential terrorists, I guess, is that we were accepting the phony Mexican matricular card as a valid form of ID. The FBI is testifying in Congress, it shouldn't be trusted. The American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators said you shouldn't rely on it. But we were. Well, fortunately, Governor Ted Kulongowski issued an executive order that took effect on February 4th, 2008, ending the practice of Oregon accepting the Mexican matricular card, and then requiring that people have to prove they're legally in the United States to get a driver's license. That date, February 4th, 2008, is important. On that date, the Oregon Department of Transportation reported a 90% reduction in intra-office fraud reports. An intra-office fraud report is a report where someone's tried to get a driver's license at one DMV, was turned down and went to another. That 90% reduction in fraud reports has remained in place ever since then. And now we have a governor that wants to go back to giving Mexican matricular cards as a valid form of ID. That's crazy. What is the experience of other states? Tennessee was the first state to give driver cards to illegal aliens in 2002. Not by coincidence, they were the first state to discontinue it 2 years later. Why did Tennessee quit issuing driver cards? What happened was drug cartels from Central and South America started flying people into Tennessee to get those cards. They bribed Tennessee DMV workers for proof of living in the state, then fan out across the United States. It got so pervasive that the FBI stepped in, and a number of Tennessee DMV workers went to federal prison. Why would we want to invite that in Oregon? It makes no sense. Well, the proponents of Measure 88 say it will require proof of insurance to get a driver's license. Look at any of the voter pamphlet statements. The governor said the same thing. Brad Avakian said the same thing. Yeah, it requires you to get insurance to get a driver's license. Baloney. You do not need to have insurance to get a driver's license. If you don't believe me, I want to quote the communications director for the Oregon Department of Motor Vehicles. Quote, this is David House. Liability insurance is not a requirement for driving privileges, including instruction permit, driver card, limited term driver's license, or the proposed driver card under Senate Bill 833, ballot measure 88. You do not need to get insurance. And when you see the governor put his name that it requires to be insurance, or Brad Avakian saying that, you have to question their integrity. Furthermore, when the Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 1080, putting into state statute the requirement you prove legally you're here in the United States to get an Oregon driver's license, some of the legislators were a bit queasy. They thought, my gosh, if illegal aliens can't get a driver's license, the percentage of uninsured motorists will go up. So they passed a companion bill, House Bill 3624, which required the Department of Motor Vehicles report back yearly to the legislature, noting the percentage of uninsured motorists in the state. Well, according to the proponents of the bill, that number should have skyrocketed. Instead, it remained static, and I want to quote their report. 2014 DMV report, 4 years after they quit issuing driver cards to illegal aliens. The results of analysis of the data before and after changes in the driver's license in 2008 show no apparent impact on people driving without insurance. Well, you can look at New Mexico as a good example. Governor Bill Richardson in 2002 convinced their legislature to give driver's licenses to illegal aliens because at that time, the rate of uninsured motorists in New Mexico was the worst in the United States at 25%. Well, what is it 12 years later? It's 24%. It doesn't make a difference. Illegal aliens are not going to get insurance. It's proved with the Oregon Department of Motor Vehicle report, and it's proved in New Mexico. Road safety. That's the other thing that the proponents say. We were talking earlier about testimony at the Oregon legislature. I was in the Senate Transportation Committee hearings when they were proposing driver's licenses for, or ending the practice of giving driver's licenses to illegal aliens. They had people stand up and testify. Am I running out of time? I'll be quick, wrap it up. That they were in the country illegally, and if they didn't get a driver's license, they were going to drive anyway. Can you imagine saying that in the Capitol building? One man, and this is on tape, anybody who's testified at the legislature knows it's all videotaped. One guy got up and said, if I can't get a driver's license, I might lose my job, I might rob banks. That's the respect illegal aliens have for our laws. Is it any wonder that they continue to break every law? Is it any wonder, I mean, you all know, if you reward illegal activity, you encourage more of it. Well, I don't want to take too much more time. I just want to close by saying this. If you believe in our sovereignty as a nation, you should vote no on 88. If you believe in the rule of law, that's important in the United States, you should vote no on Measure 88. If you believe that American citizens should have jobs and good wages and not have to be in competition with people from other countries who are willing to work and be paid under the table, you should vote no on Measure 88. I encourage you to read the sheriff's voter pamphlet statement. Oregon has 36 sheriffs. Their association voted to oppose Measure 88, and I encourage all of you to do the same. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Yes, we'll do questions. We just ran out of time on the television show. The Washington County Public Affairs Forum is a service of its members to get issues before the public. And the TV show ends in about 15 seconds, so I'll just say thank you for being here. Steve Buckstein, the Cascade Policy Institute, Treasurer Wheeler, and our present speaker will be taking questions. You won't see it on the television because we're stopping right now.
I appreciate that. You probably saved me from a very embarrassing situation. Yes, sir.
I'm Lee Coleman, a forum member, and we've had a discussion about this before, but why would we not want the state and the state police to have the name, photograph, and current address of people who are driving on our streets? I see this as a law and order issue. The rule of law is important, there's no question about that. But why would we not want to have these records for those people?
The Oregon Department of Transportation has no database on Mexican matricular cards. So if that person has got 3 or 4 of those cards, they've got no way of knowing who they are. I've had state troopers tell me they've pulled over people before who've had 5 Mexican matricular cards. Same picture on each one of them, different address, and they jumbled their name around. There's no database to determine if they've had driving infractions. We had a man who killed 2 people in Yamhill County. He had 6 DUIs, an illegal alien. 6 DUIs. Now, I don't know whether or not he had a license anymore. But the fact of the matter is, we don't want to reward illegal activity because you only encourage more of it. Yes,
Karen Packer, Forum member, and I'd like to say first that I really think it's unforgivable that we have allowed this very important issue not to have the other side presented. When you started out, you said that this man would be talking to us about the pros as well as the cons. That did not turn out to be true.
He was kidding. He was kidding, ma'am. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the forum itself, not you. This discussion should have been put off until the other side was properly represented. There's no reason why it couldn't have been put off to another one, and I'm really disappointed in the forum that this kind of discussion was only one-sided, especially on an important thing like a ballot measure. And to talk about the rule of law, excuse me, but the governor signed a bill into law. That was the rule of law. If anything, you've broken it by trying to undo that rule of law.
Do you want to? Yeah.
We earlier made a contact with the CASA, and basically the board committee, I was trying to get hold of Louis, the Hillsborough chief of police. I was given his number. I made numerous calls over several weeks.
I gave you his
And
number.
and he gave his number, and basically I was unable to get a return call from that. Then last week we called back to CASA, and we said we want to know who's going to appear here today. CASA indicated that they were going to be doing a large function today with the governor, I think, and the labor and Radovakian, and they couldn't spare anyone to come here. So I called back to see if we could get anyone, spoke to the media director, and they were given opportunities to be here. Obviously, if they did not have that same person who spoke to us back in July or August, then of course, then that's a problem. So it falls on me. I'll take personal responsibility for that, though I made calls on a weekly basis to one of their regular known speakers, and I called last week to try to get the La Casa to appear. And we actually have 2 more days left. We've got next week where we have open primaries, and then next week we have 3 legislative elections. So I apologize for not having gotten that done, but it wasn't solely for lack of effort.
Ma'am, you raised the specter that what we're doing is against the law.
No, I said you did not follow the rule of law as it was.
We did follow the rule of law. The rule of law in Oregon is you can file a referendum on a bill that the governor has signed that not yet enacted. So we followed it, believe me, we followed it to the T.
All I'm saying is you didn't respect the bill.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Now, we have a right as a citizen to file a referendum. Maybe you don't like that right, but we have that right. Yes.
Lois O'Brien. I just want to say I agree and I understand everything. I know you're a man of integrity. Everything you said is true. And there's some information going around about this issue that the driver's license would not be used for getting on an airplane. But recently, Nico Melendez, Western Regional TSA spokesman, says the cards will be accepted to board airplanes. Now, everybody can have their own reason for saying, well, this is not a good idea, or that's, I disagree with that, so therefore, but the fact is, these laws we have laws in our national laws that are directed at what is illegal and what isn't in this situation. And to disregard that is just going off on your own. And it's our adherence to the laws that made our country great. And let me say, John Adams, a smart man, he said, like it or not, this is true. It is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom and security stand. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the governance of others. Thank you.
If you go to the TSA website and look at what can be used as identification, it says driver's license or other state photo ID cards issued by Department of Motor Vehicles or equivalent for the purpose of identification. The man has come out and basically told people in the state, according to the Oregon Department of Transportation, that the driver card that will be issued to people illegally here, who can't prove they're legally here, will be valid to board a plane. And with the, I don't know, maybe people have forgotten 9/11 already. I haven't. Yes, sir.
Eric Squires, Forum member. Jim, first, thanks for your presentation. Second, I shared this concern, and that is both sides have wonderful merits to their arguments, but I look at this as from a different perspective. The last time I did jury duty, Judge Nadigal at Washington County went on a 15-minute tirade on the quality of DMV's database, and I present to you this.
Looks like you.
It is, but on the height of my driver's license, according to the state of Oregon, is 2 foot 8 inches tall. And so if you compute my body mass, now it also says I'm 130 pounds. So if you compute my body mass index, you've just met the fattest man on the planet. So I submit to you this, is that just because this legislation may or may not pass, we still have a state database, and DMV is an organization that may not be suitable to actually implement what you desire. And I'm curious if you've thought that out. Do you think that DMV has got the wherewithal in order to successfully execute what you submit?
Are you saying, do you think that I question whether DMV can implement Senate Bill 833 or Measure 88?
Certainly.
Yeah, I don't think they can. I mean, I think you've been on a stretcher, is what has happened.
Okay. Thank you.
No, I mean, the FBI has testified in Congress that you shouldn't accept the Mexican matricular card. You can go to a street corner and buy one for $30. When you go in to get a license, I don't know how many people have had to renew their license recently. Your Social Security number is going to be screened against the database of the Department of Homeland Security. You've got to have your original birth certificate, not a copy of it, or a valid passport, proof you live in the state, and an official photo ID. Under Measure 88, all an illegal alien will need is a phony Mexican matricular card, which they can buy for $30, and proof that somehow they live in the state. It can be insignificant as a camping fee with their name on it, period. A high standard for American citizens, a low standard for illegal aliens. Once again, if this nation keeps rewarding people who do things illegally, it's on a downward trend. The rule of law is important. And if the rule of law, ma'am, and I'm sorry, you just can't pick and choose what part of the rule of law you like.
You did.
I did not.
You did.
Yes, sir.
Lee Coleman, Forum member, back again. I would really kind of like to have an answer to the question that I asked you, which was not about Mexican national matricular cards or whatever they're called, and what about all the other illegal aliens in this country? There are a lot more than just Mexicans, you know. But I would like to know your take on why the state of Oregon should not collect information on these folks who want to drive on the streets of Oregon. Why do you want to deny us and our state police and our police organizations access to at least a photograph, at least an address, and at least a name of these foreign nationals, not only just Mexicans, to use as law enforcement database? Don't answer on the basis of matricular cards. That's old news. Get back to the question that I asked you.
Okay, if you'll give me a chance, I will. New Mexico passed driver's licenses for illegal aliens under Bill Richardson. Susana Martinez is the new governor. She is avidly opposed to driver's licenses for illegal aliens. She's done everything she can to end the practice. One of the things she did was have the New Mexico Department of Motor Vehicles mail a letter to all the people who got driver cards in New Mexico, stating to them, unless they replied back, they were going to lose their driver's license. And they started with the alphabet A. They had something like 50,000 letters that weren't returned. 50,000. There's so much fraud in New Mexico. Unfortunately, the New Mexico legislature then stopped the process of going through the file and taking out the people that had phony driver cards. You say, why would we want their name and address? Well, New Mexico says they don't live there. They have 20 people at one address. Oregon, the same thing. Negative. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to express my confidence in the officers of this organization and in particular in the Speaker's Bureau. In this unusual circumstance, they saw fit to let only one side of the story be heard. I think everyone in this room is aware of the fact that we have heard only one side of the story. It's a disservice to our intelligence to think that we'll all go home and vote in one direction because we've heard only one side of the story. Thank you.
I told you should never invite me.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lubick, and I do take a personal responsibility for it. Thank you for saying that, but it really is my job to get somebody here. And we did try. We could have done better, obviously, but we should have gone to Brad Avaki and see if an elected official wanted to do it. But we didn't know till Friday that the CASA didn't intend to send anybody, and that's just the way it is. When you're scheduling, you have to basically be cognizant of the limitations of the organizations. And what I've found during the last, because we started trying to schedule in July, a lot of the ballot measure committees are volunteers. People have this idea that there's huge paid organizations that are just cranking this stuff out. Sometimes they are, but some of the people we spoke to in July still aren't still with those organizations. They have a limited framework of volunteers. Almost nobody's paid. Are you getting paid, Mr. Ludwig? Yeah, nobody's getting. Oregon's a volunteer state.
Don might have gotten my half a chicken sandwich. I don't know.
Okay, well, there you go. But it's really kind of, when you're scheduling, it's really difficult to find out who is actually in charge of an organization and where the continuity of the organization is. So thank you, Mr. Luke. Thank you for your time here. We have a board meeting following, and we'll discuss some of these issues, a kind of a brief board meeting. And I thank everybody for their attention. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share it.
I went to the Oregon site. You're going to take I did that this morning. It didn't say it was posted.
Wow, nobody cared anything about the issues today. No opinions. How's your world? Craziness has dialed down a little bit. So I show up. Is the jail out there? That was funny because I got invited to stand next to candidate presentation, and I asked him about that. And before I completed my sentence, there was a knee-jerk reaction of, I know that we're not going to see eye to eye. Well, I basically was asked about the other side. Growth is going to be the best thing ever.
Who's the guy that goes think out
Just immediately on the shift.
Exactly. You need people think right about so whether it's if you want to go ahead and try to go ahead
Would you shut the camera off?
Governor actually said that people in this room have three things, but they're assuming that everybody that gets a card is going to drive right or anything like that. But the thing is, the vast majority of people are driving insurance.